What do you think of when you think of Buckhead? Probably shopping, restaurants, skyscrapers, nightlife. Also probably a lot of traffic. But let's rewind. Over 200 years. Where I'm standing now, right on Peachtree Road, was Peachtree Trail, a Native American trail that was also used by the growing number of white settlers in the area. This was Muskogee Creek land, right near their border with the Cherokee Nation. When the Muskogee were deported from the area and the land was taken by the state of Georgia, Henry Irby, a white man, bought 202.5 acres of land right on this spot for only $650. Irby built a tavern right about there. I'm at the intersection of West Paces Ferry, Peachtree Road, and Roswell Road. And that tavern became known as Irbyville. Now, this wasn't at all the metropolitan area that we now think of it today. This was way out in the country, far, far from the little tiny city that would someday become Atlanta. But it's not called Irbyville today, it's called Buckhead. So why? Well, the story goes is that Henry Irby once shot a male deer and hung its head, antlers and all, from the outside of his tavern. People began calling it Buckhead, and the name stuck. We still call it that today, even though it's no longer rural, and it is quite an important part of the city of Atlanta. But Irbyville, Buckhead, it was just a small town then, and an example of that is that their first industry, other than the tavern, was that there was a clay seam found in the area, which people thought was good for pottery, and a pottery factory was built in this area. It wasn't until the late 1800s and early 1900s when wealthy white Atlantans began building their country homes here in Buckhead. The land became valuable, and eventually, by the 1950s, Buckhead was annexed into the city of Atlanta. But it's not that story that I'm going to tell you today. Instead, there was a community of African American people living very close to Irbyville in an area that they called Macedonia Park. And it's that story that we're going to go visit because there's a cemetery that is still in existence, tucked into a corner of Frankie Allen Park. So let's brave the Buckhead traffic and I'll show it to you. Come on. Now that you know some of the story of Buckhead and the story of Macedonia Park and that community, I'm going to take you to the remnants of that story, what we can still see. It's the Mount Olive Cemetery, and it's tucked into Frankie Allen Park, which is now really just a collection of ball fields and tennis courts. It's right around the corner here. Let's see if we can find it. This is Frankie Allen Park. Buckhead baseball has their leagues here, and of course there's some great tennis courts. It's right between Buckhead Village and Garden Hills and is now a thriving park. But this land has been the site of push and pull with development and money interests in Atlanta for a long, long time. Around the turn of the 20th century, this area was known as Macedonia Park, and it was a thriving African American community, a blacksmith shop, a grocery store, a restaurant, several churches, and the cemetery, which we're about to go to. But the city of Atlanta began thinking of annexing Buckhead and wanting to create a park for the Buckhead residents. They used the Slum Clearance Ordinance to pay off the families of Macedonia Park, bulldoze those homes, and turn it into a park. The only thing that was left was the Mount Olive Cemetery, the cemetery of one of the Macedonia Park churches. So it became a park, but then 75 years later, there was another development crisis. A high-rise was slated to be built right on top of the Mount Olive Cemetery. This time, however, some of the stories were being told, and the Macedonia Park descendants went to the Atlanta City Council and were able to put a stop to the development and to get the Buckhead Heritage Society to begin restoring the Mount Olive Cemetery, removing invasive plants and beginning to restore the headstones and the graves of people who used to live at Macedonia Park. So let's go and check out the cemetery and see what's been done to restore and lift up the remnants of this historically Black community. Oh no. Y'all, I was telling you that the Buckhead Heritage Society has been trying to restore this cemetery. Somebody has come in and done the opposite. Graves are knocked over everywhere. There's glass on the ground. This was the grave of the wife of the pastor of this church. And this grave here has been here for almost 100 years. Somebody just knocked it over. Oh, there's more graves over here. I just hate seeing these gravestones knocked over. Oh, there's a dead chicken on the ground. People have not been treating this cemetery right. Still, there are historians who are telling the story of the people of Macedonia Park and of the Mount Olive Cemetery. And without this cemetery, there might be a skyscraper on this site. And without people knowing the story and telling the story. So to me, that's, well, the tragedy of this spot and also the promise that even dead history can still keep history alive. So I hope you come to the Mount Olive Cemetery, check out what's left of it, and maybe you might even join a volunteer day and help raise these headstones back to the way they should be and raise the stories of the folks that used to live in Macedonia Park. Oh. Now, I've been taking you guys to cemeteries all over Atlanta today, and I've been jokingly calling this episode Dead History. So what better to end the episode with than a ghost story? We're on our way to the Concord Road covered bridge, one of the last covered bridges still in existence in Atlanta, and it's the site of a ghost story. The Waterheads are the ghosts, well, at least that's what the locals call them. And here's how the story goes. The Waterheads are the names that folks have given to the ghosts. Could it be a boy who was killed in gristmill machinery back in the 1800s? Or maybe the ghosts of children that drowned in Nickajack Creek below the bridge. But here's how the ghost story goes. First, after dark, you pull into the Concord Road covered bridge like I'm doing now. Once you're in the center of the bridge, make sure you have a Snickers bar with you. And when it's fully dark, you turn the lights off of your car. You stop in the middle of the bridge. You put the Snickers bar on the roof of your car, but I can't stop right now. There's cars behind me. You put the Snickers bar on the roof of your car, and when you reach up to get it, you'll hear skittering on the roof of your car, and the Snickers bar will be gone. The Waterheads took it. I think it's a pretty silly ghost story, actually. But the fact that a ghost story even exists in a place like this is a reminder that people love their history. So I can't stop in the middle of the bridge, but I can pull over here on Concord Road and Covered Bridge Road and tell you a little bit more about the history. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been enamored by covered bridges. I don't know, maybe it's the kind of like olden days kind of nature of them. The reason why a bridge like this would have been covered was to help horses not get spooked crossing the creek. I guess it made them feel like they were entering a barn as opposed to crossing a big span over a river. But this bridge hasn't always been covered. All right, so what's the history of it beyond the kind of funny ghost story? Well, this bridge has been in existence since the 1840s, but it wasn't covered. Just beyond the bridge was Ruff's Grist Mill. John Ruff ran a grist mill, which was a water-powered wheel that helped grind corn, wheat, or other grains into flour. Then, before it became a covered bridge, During the Civil War, on July 4th, 1864, there was a large Civil War battle that happened here. It was called the Battle of Ruff's Mill. It happened before what is titled the Battle of Atlanta, and the purpose was to move the Confederate soldiers back across the Chattahoochee River. This was a Union victory, and I guess its claim to fame is it's the only time during the Atlanta campaign that Federal soldiers were able to overrun on foot and horse Confederate earthworks. So when did it become a covered bridge? I've seen a couple dates. It could be the 1870s, as early as that, or it might be as late as the 1890s. But since then, that means for over 100 years, this has been a covered bridge, which worked just fine in the days of horses and buggies. But now that there's all these cars like you see today, well, the covered bridge has become kind of something that gets in the way. The whole drive up to the bridge, there are all these signs telling you it's only 7 feet tall, trucks have to turn back. If you hit these dangling chains, then you gotta turn and go a different direction. But you see there's tons of people that like doing their commute on this historic bridge. It's one lane, it's made of wood, and it's been rebuilt over and over and over to keep its historic nature. In fact, the neighborhood around it is even called the Concord Road Covered Bridge Historic District. And I think that's why I wanted to end this episode right here at this location. Because the cemeteries that we've been looking at today, the dead history, they've really been cared for by people. And they've become sites of living history, even though they're a place where people are buried. And this place right here, the Concord Road Covered Bridge, is a place with layer upon layer of history, from the original grist mill to the Civil War battle to the historic bridge that we get to drive over today, and even that unusual ghost story about the waterheads. So today, I hope that you've had a great time learning some dead history and knowing that all history in Atlanta is truly living. This is Jonah McDonald, and I'll see you next time.